Good evening, everybody. And it seems like it's a long time since I've spoken to you. We've spoken to you. We hope you enjoyed our encore selections for November and December because we clashed with the holidays. But tonight we are back live with a bang. Actually, with a lot more than a bang. We're welcoming tomorrow today. Because we have a guest coming to us live from Australia. So our Australian guest knows what's going to happen to us before we wake up tomorrow morning, I think. I've never quite worked that one out. But anyway, we are very delighted to welcome to the Marsh and ANCAN, Claire Gaskin. And come on in, Claire. And hello. And we're thrilled to have Claire with us. Claire is a poet, an author, a teacher, and we are going to be focusing tonight on a sensitive topic in terms of PTSD, which is, I guess it's a term that has become familiar to all of us, but when I was a kid, we had completely other terms. We had completely different names for it. I remember the guys who came back from the older guys from World War I and World War II, and they had PTSD, but they didn't call it PTSD. And now we all recognize it as PTSD. So Claire works with PTSD, lives with PTSD, helps people with PTSD. And so, Claire, we are going to hopefully learn some ways in which you help people handle their PTSD and how you've handled your PTSD. And if I get too intrusive, you just have to hold your hands up and we'll back off. But I would like to start. Normally we talk about history. We won't go to history. We'll let you introduce us to how you come to be living with PTSD and where this starts.
Thanks, Rick. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and write, Bunurong country, and heartfeltly pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and Indigenous people that may be listening here this evening, this afternoon. Sovereignty has never been ceded. This land was taken by force and is retained by force. And I'm prepared to be accountable for my part in the ongoingness in that and to be part of redress. So thanks, Rick. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So I'd say that people with my experience live with complex trauma and all the long-term effects of childhood sexual abuse. Yes, so I would say that I use poetry when the symptoms are too intense to contain. It's really poetry is a great way of getting that out. It's better out than in, quite simply. Mm-hmm. It's a radical act of survival to create in any art form. But for me, poetry is particularly well placed to hold the intensity and complexity of complex trauma and the symptoms. Yeah, and I can go on.
You should go on as long as you want, as long as you need to, because this is as much about us, you helping yourself, and us as helping others.
Yeah, well, that's that's fantastic, and thank you for inviting me onto this show that has that as an aim. You know, yeah, I think it's an incredible, powerful thing to do, to be involved in the arts. It as soon as you are creative, you're not just what has happened to you. You've got agency, you've got a voice, you've got a story, and you have impact. So particularly for me, poetry is a great way of at first accessing my story and of just have been empowered about my story. It's also a way of having a relationship with myself. Like I write and then I read what I've written. So I have a writing self and a reading self. So I no longer identify as just what's happened to me. And hopefully when anyone tells their story, it encourages others. You know, they may not feel safe to tell their story, and there's very good reason for that, but might let others know that they're not on their own, and that it's not their shame, and that they're a worthwhile, lovable, valuable person who contributes to society.
So, was there a point in your life when you recognized what had happened, and then when you started writing poetry? I mean, what there must have been a point in your life when you fell out of the naivety of what had happened to you and recognized it as a trauma or a trauma, and then at some point you figured out that you could deal with this trauma by expressing yourself through poetry. When was that? How did that come about?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I was turned on to poetry by a really good teacher, really great literature teacher, Pat Clayton, if you're out there. And she infused me with her passion. Yeah, look, I think over time, you know, I came to poetry because I felt like it really was a place to hold the intensity and the complexity of what I was holding inside, and to have that, you know, to exist. It was validating that it was in black and white. It also, poetry is very much a way of coming to knowledge, to working out what I think and feel. A lot of people with trauma don't have a linear narrative or aren't represented in the dominant narrative. So they have to work out what their story is, like you're intimating, over time, and come to their own narrative, their own story, rather than the one that's been imposed on them. So again, as soon as you put pen to paper, you're no longer what you're, you know, being told to think and feel, or you're no longer how other people represent you. You're representing yourself. But also too, I think it's a way of sort of unpacking the implicit power that's there in language. So it sort of undoes language and looks at, you know, language is so powerful and words are so powerful, and poetry is a way of unpacking certain labels we're given and seeing what the implications of those are, and then maybe, you know, thinking about ways we want to identify, self-identify, rather than, you know, wear those labels, or, you know, rather than be, you know, have this reductionist or diminished view of ourselves that might be out there in public consciousness, or might, you know, might be in the best interests of people who actually want to keep us silenced. So it's a way of really breaking those silences and dealing with some of the abuses of power that go on, that can be really implicit in language.
So you have a couple of sets of poetry to read to us. Why don't you introduce the first set and launch into your work?
Thanks, Rick. I'll read from Ismai's, most recent book, Ismai's Survivable Resistance today. This collection of poetry, I adopt Ismai's name from Sophocles' play Antigone to explore what survivable resistance may look like, and shedding some light on what it's like to live on after Greek tragedy-like trauma is over. I'm suggesting that Antigone's sister, Ismene, had an alternative way of resisting abuses of power and living on her own terms. Like, we don't need to die to stand up to abuses of power. We can live and find ways, survival tools to help us live with complex trauma. So these poems are written in the voice of a contemporary Ismene. So the first poem I'll read to you, I'm really looking at how we can come to knowledge through poetry, because poetry has this unique way of being able to place the fragmentary together and see what stories that tells when when the fragments talk to each other. So this is a sestina. So for those of you who don't know, a sestina repeats 6 words at the end of lines in a specific pattern. So Ismene reads her psych's book on dissociation. The mattress holds the heat of the mind haunted. The dream rivers reason with the tree roots to remember. The cradle flinches in the breeze, fracturing, holding through the night of nights derealized. This journey does not involve going anywhere fragmented. My mind outside my body, having a body is to blame. Pulling the ripcord of silk self-blame. Not present feels like I'm ghosting, haunting. My skin alight with the pain of a refrain fragment. Blood to forgiveness throbbing in my knuckles remembered. Narratives run through my fingers, derealized. Time calculated in the imprint of my face as the clay fractures. The stone dropped into the pool of my pelvis, fracturing. I forgive you, Father, for you have sinned and are to blame. The glass of water on the windowsill, reacting to the foundations derealized. I am matter, I do matter. I am a spirit haunted, thrown into the sea of ancestors remembered. My feet are rubbed out as the waves fragment, the ticking of the passing bike in winking time fragments. I see the effect, but not the cause, fracturing. The floors worn through in a puddle of raw wood to remember. My hands mangled birds are the weather blames. You cannot perceive the imperceptible through perception, but meaning is a haunting. Awareness is one thing, action is another. Substituting is depersonalization. Disintegration of identity, experience derealized. How traumatized people talk in sentence fragments. A demolished base is not a safe haunt. Scenes flash, topic switching, and my credibility fractures. The 2 major tasks in life are to love and to work, not to be blamed. The more severe, the less remembered. I fight through the curtains to get into my psych's room to remember. The smell of the dark of my mother's wardrobe, their bedroom depersonalized. It's harder to be autonomous when the culpable don't take the blame. In murky water, hair in waving reeds, submerged trees, and bone fragments. On the surface of the lake, the clouds fracture. Wanting it to be other than it is doesn't stop the truth haunting. A poem is remembering in collaged fragments, limits derealized from forming fatigue fractures. A child with no outline feels to blame. It is an oceanic haunting. Thank you.
Thank you. As
I've
I'm
got more.
another one.
Oh no, you go on. It'd be nice to have a break.
No. Please read another one if you would like. If not, I'm going to ask you a question because something came to me as I was listening to you. Would you prefer to read a second one and then we'll talk?
No, you ask me. That would be good. You ask me the question.
Okay. So what I'm thinking that usually PTSD is tied to an incident or particular incidents at a point in time. And as life goes on, that time becomes more distant. So I'm thinking, does that experience change as you get older and as you have more life experience? And does that affect how you express your art? Or is it still as fresh today as the trauma as it was originally, and the art is sort of static and stuck at that point? Do you understand what I'm asking? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, look, I think I'm talking about a complex trauma. So I think what you might be, referring to is an incident. So,
Right.
as you know, like if it's not just one incident, if it's long-term abuse or childhood sexual abuse, then it's really you're looking at complex trauma. Look, it's going to be different for everyone. I mean, I think as I said in this poem, and as I understand from my research, the way the mind works is just simply turn away from something that's not pleasant. So the more severe, the less remembered. So one of my sufferings is having memories. I have memories, but also not having memories or having, not clear memories. And of course, if you're very young, that's a reason not to have memories. So it becomes more like, for me, it's been a process of, some stuff is too hard to believe, even, for yourself. So for me, it's become a way of undoing my lack of belief in myself and coming to believe my own experience. And that's really, I know something to be true, but I don't want to believe it. And so this becomes this sort of war inside, and holding the complexity of that is really difficult. So again, I think poetry is a way of, it can hold, contradictory feelings, contradictory, for instance, for me, it's quite contradictory that I know, but I don't believe. And so in life that can play out,
Right.
as going the other way as well, like knowing, believing something and knowing it's not true, like, oh, this person's trustworthy, and I know it's not true, but I believe it because, my family of origin weren't trustworthy. So I love those people. So again, it's sort of difficult to hold that complexity of, loving the people that did you harm. And, it can be hard stuff to hold. So I think for me, poetry, but the arts in general, can be a place to hold that and to, and to create something that's an act of creation as opposed to it's taking back some control of what was destroyed. You know, you see it there. It's outside of yourself. And so it's helpful in terms of, oh, that's actually what happened. There it is. You know, I believe that it's in black and white. That's my experience. It's valid, even if everyone tells me it's not. So, yeah, in terms of, look, unfortunately for some of us, you know, it is lifelong, you know, and it's coming to, I think, through the arts, finding community, finding connection, you know, accepting what I have to live with, not fighting that, not expecting it, you know, to go away necessarily, that, you know, but just to live with it, and, you know, be part of things like this, have the great richness that it brings to use the arts in this way.
So read us another poem, and then
Okay.
I've got plenty more questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. What does it mean to require what breaks you? Judith Butler. Break on the rocks. Breaking and reforming to break again. Break. The drama is burning the limits of love. When he Freudianly texted that he could do with a hit instead of a hug, I knew not to go over. Addiction is when my choice is gone. Desire or historical harm can activate. Motherless and not mine, marriage and convention do not believe in me. I can only do the impossible. Everything dripping with continuity, water, the cararong call, the magpie warble. Everything aches in the rain, the joints between words and the space between breaths. I was formed by breaking against those that would break me, the moments that wake me to love, and I am not a mistake. So when I am formless and need to reform, I need to resist this tidal pull, breaking with those that broke me. So tied to the page, the home page, the sparrows above head level land on chairbacks as I land writing the continuous present. The light aches for prayer as awareness displaces denial. An angel streaming water hand to hand as evening is spooned into the back bar. I am drunk on too much too soon and the death of not knowing. How do you communicate something multiple, the clarity of collision? As soon as you acknowledge what you have, you are losing it. Only the unnamed has the power to exist without boundaries. A sparrow and me at the long table. It's happy hour. The bartender polishes glasses. Finally, 3 friends enter chatting, oblivious to the cathedral of echoing. Thank you.
So I'm curious how you have this, the technique that you've developed, which is, if you like, to reconcile and rebuild yourself through words and come to terms with what happened that you may not have believed but did happen, with where you are today, and putting that all back together in something tangible that you can see, words. How have you helped others with PTSD do similar? And where have you done that?
Yeah, I hope by example, I think by truth telling, I hope that others who've had similar experience feel that they're not alone. It's also like, something comes of this. It's not just about the trauma, like imagery does this beautiful thing of bringing the mind and body into the one place.
Mhm.
And the intellect and the emotional marry. And hopefully, as much as there's pain, there's beauty there as well. So there's something that, life is in the now, even though we hold the past. I teach in community centers at universities, and I encourage people to tell their stories, their experience, to be in control of their own representation, to not, to think beyond what we've been told to think and feel, and to access what you actually think and feel. So I'll often write and then I'll read it. I go, that's how I feel about that. This happened, 3 days later, after I read what I've written, go, I see. This is what I think about that. This is what I feel about that. So for me, the methods of poetry are a way of accessing our own experience. And for some of us who's when our experience isn't represented, like I've said, in the dominant narrative, that's just a really helpful tool. And when the labels we're given aren't the ones that are true, again, it's or when the labels are used to disempower us or to keep us quiet, we've got to keep making noise. That's what we're doing when we're in the arts. We're making noise. And that's a really important thing to do. And yeah, I encourage people in my teaching to write of their own experience, to write about what they really care about, what they are angry about or feel passionately about. And that has great results. It has great results. We can only know our world one story at a time, one poem at a time. Until we hear someone else's experience, we don't have understanding, we don't have empathy or compassion. And particularly poetry, because the poetry doesn't tell us what to think or feel, it makes us think and feel. It does something to language, not necessarily just with language. It is something and not necessarily about something. Yes.
I love this idea of you coming to terms and understandings a significant time after you've written what you wrote, that it's almost like it comes out and it's got to get out, and you get it on the paper, and who knows how it got onto the paper that way. And then you can come back to it 2 or 3 days later and suddenly see that it means something that wasn't evident to you in the beginning. It might have been there in the subconscious, but you didn't know. Is that right? Is that what you're saying to me? I mean, that's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. There are things that are, a secret to ourselves, and especially, poetry is elusive and evocative and associative. Through using those methods, we come to knowledge and we come to understanding of things that have been, or we give language to things that we've felt but not understood. And when we give something language, sometimes we have to undo language to do that. And then in a reconstruction, we give language to something that we've just felt, then, you know, it takes it to a different level of experience. And there's some consolation in that. If it's painful, if it's beautiful, to, yeah, see that it's actually something's come of that, you know, and it's a radical act to create, especially after destruction. Yeah,
Time for
I mean,
another
if I
poem.
could, time for another poem. I think that's a good idea. So, you know, I'm looking at in this book tools that Ismani might use to live on to survive. So this one's called Ismani in a 12-step program. And I should have said at the beginning, like, there is content warning, obviously, because of what we're talking about. So if this work brings up anything for you, please take some care around that, and yeah, do some nursing of yourself around that. Ismani in a 12-step program. I can tell you about powerlessness. Step 1, knowing it is going to happen and being able to do nothing. Antigone chooses to die rather than survive abuse. Pinned down, his sweat dripping in my face, saying you may as well enjoy it. Something severed it. Wasn't love and sex. It was abuse from love. He didn't love me. All my abusers before that had loved me. I dreamt I was walking through the rubble of my family home, seeking shelter there. I loved them. That is what children do. Consequences of knowing things I could not believe. I had sex again with him to make him feel. I could have learned, not spent a life trying to make my abusers love me. If I'd been able to be present, my boyfriend's parting words, it's not the same. He came back 30 years later, said he could have dealt with it better. Believing it, I knew it was not true. Sitting on the steps of ourselves, cleaning my feet, constantly re-traumatizing each other. I did my best not to survive it. Meet and repeat the annihilation in addiction. I am here because I know about a lifetime of refusal. I dreamt I was painting. I wasn't in control of my medium and I had the wrong brushes. You don't have to believe to pray. Survival is the radical act. Wasn't I reason enough for her to stay alive? What is survivable resistance? Polynices was already dead. I know the Greek tragedy thing, once it's set in motion, it must play out. But I'm still here to feel the sun on my body and the water to witness my blaring heart. My abuser was giving me admission, something my family would never give me. I have to grip the arms of my chair to stay present. I use sex to avoid intimacy. Did she love Polynices more than life? Is that love? She made him her god. I get that she felt like he was irreplaceable. What was I? But so was she, sister. I could bury my dead in private. She needed it to be seen by others. Is to survive it to comply? She died to what they call sanity, logic, law, so I could live. She covered up the first burial was mine. I couldn't stay in the house with Creon. I took off, got as far as Sydney before I met someone. We swam, drank, had lots of sex, and moved on to the next beach whenever we wanted. I got a job at a magazine. The editor had sent everyone out. Lying on a hot rock by black water, the sound of metal balls being placed on the ground. I am left. I am what is left. My body a bargain with presence, where things move in the breeze. It was the gaze of the train, the inevitability, the lake hollows, the sound of voices. Thank you.
It takes me a minute. I've got to come back to, oh, I've got to switch on my I'm getting a little lost in your poetry. I suppose that's a good thing, right? That's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the idea.
So tell me, give me maybe from the time that you've been working with others who are traumatized and helping them, is there an example that's really stood out to you where you really feel that a student, or I don't want to really say a patient because they're not patients per se, but a client per se, or a friend that you've really helped, and something that stands out in your mind that you could relate?
I don't want to speak for other people. I'm sort of reticent too, but it has been very rich and rewarding when I see people come to classes and they're identifying as being unwell in some way or another. And then I watch them start to identify as being other than that, to start to identify as being a writer. And to me, and yeah, to engage on that level, to engage in the world of ideas, to engage politically with a voice, to publish. I find that, and to create something out of pain that doesn't turn from the pain, but that is beautiful because it's a creation. I mean, that is incredibly rewarding for me, to be involved in that. And maybe I can bring up a project I've been recently involved in. Yeah.
Sure.
So I've been involved in this program, and we put out this wonderful book. It's called Left, Right, Hook. So it combines writing and boxing. And so in this book that we have the stories of survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And really what I'd like people to understand is that we talk about resilience and healing, and that's something to talk about, but I would like people to understand that the effects are long term and lifelong. And I think a book like Full, founded by academic and filmmaker Donna Lyon, helps to educate the community of what people live with on a day-to-day basis when they have PTSD or complex trauma. Yeah, so this is, we got together in a series of workshops, and we sat around in a circle, and Donna gave us writing prompts. We wrote, and we read it to each other, and we held that for each other, those stories that, some of the stories in here can make your eyes bleed, what people actually have experienced and what people feel often can't share, either because it will, traumatize others, or because they'll be judged. So it was beautiful to be in a space where there was no judgment, and no silencing, and yeah, write together. And then we would get up because, as Van der Kolk says, the body holds trauma, and there's, to get up and then box afterwards was a way of releasing that physically. And, boxing is a skill and a focus skill. So it's a way of sort of, like once stuff has been brought up and is out, to give it a physical expression, and again to hold each other in that. So yeah, this is a collection that Donna and I edited together of 8 women who were involved in this program and project that is going to documentary. And it was a research project, so it was proven that the women felt more agency at the end of the workshops than they did before. So, that's been something really, that's, it's been significant in my coming to more, again, I think just kindness and toward myself, and but also community, and connection with others, that experiences.
I'm wondering whether that experience could have happened if it was a mixed group rather than just a female group.
Well, it was a group of women and gender diverse people. Of course, this isn't something that just happens to women, but sometimes, being in the world with a female body is something, and a lot of the women's trauma, has to do with male violence, but not solely. It would be wonderful to, have, and I think that things do exist. It would probably need to be, or possibly need to be run by a man, if that's what and we have had men approach us wanting to share their experience, and have been, supportive of the fact that it has been thus far, a group of, women and gender diverse people. But yeah, in time that would be wonderful.
Is there, I'm first of all, this is an assumption, but left, right hook, I assume reflects some of the writings that were created during the experience.
It's all that. It's all that.
It's all that.
So what
Right.
we wrote together, we all responded to the same
Right.
prompt. So Donna came up with this structure of it being in 3 rounds.
So I don't know if you've prepared this, so you could say, no, I don't want to do it. But I'm wondering if you could find something that you wrote during that experience that you'd be willing to share with us. One of your writings.
I haven't prepared that, but I've got the book right in front of me, full of the writings, so I'm sure I can do that.
There might be something that just you loved and you're so proud of that you wrote in that space that you would love to share.
Okay, so this one is, we all responded to the same prompts, as I said, and this one is a page long, and it's responding to the prompt of speaking to your inner child or your inner children, which
Right.
is quite significant for someone who's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So
For sure.
I'll read you this one.
Yes, please.
Dear children, I know that when you were in the kitchen and your brother was in the roof, an axe fell through the roof. Was it deliberate? He was in the roof. No one else was around. Men on the roof shouting to each other. Plaster is falling. The electricity is being affected. The light is flickering. Big bang, and now I can see the holes. The holes were always there. Now I can see sky through them. Emotional sobriety. See the holes, see the sky. It rains inside. Dear child, your hands were in prayer position. You really did believe. A rosary draped over your hand. I hated you for being so vulnerable. I didn't feel present sitting on the couch with him. I said, why don't we sit on the floor and run our hands over each other's faces? He agreed. An exercise in intimacy. Then I said something that upset him and he completely closed, and I completely opened and flew from sanity, slamming the already slammed door. Dear child, people say you can hold her. I hate her for letting herself be abused by being so open and loving. I still can be open and loving. Being loved is more challenging. The angry child screws her face up and screams, you don't deserve love. What are you doing? Dear child, I know you are angry. That is understandable, but you are not driving the bus right now. You do deserve love, dear child. It's okay you were loving and trusting. I can hold you now, protect you. You are held. You are loved. Dear child, look at the photo of you. You did exist. Someone who lived across the road from me, from the family home, sent me a photo on Facebook of me and him in a school photo. So young, so real. I blocked him. Why? I had cut off, forgotten he existed. I existed, confronted with that child as if I'd made up not just my abuse, but my whole childhood, like it didn't exist if I didn't look at it. Dear child, you do exist. I know you are there, dear child, in that white communion dress. No wonder you do not wear white. Nothing to do with pasta sauce. Dear child, you are hungry. That's not okay. Dear child, I will not starve you now. I know it's hard to eat, to swallow, but I will feed you, cook for you, food to be enjoyed. I know you can't swallow.
Ooh. And that was the piece you wrote on the spot, in the workshop.
Yeah,
And
all of the pieces in the book were written on the spot. And there's something about the intent and of coming together and to, you know, to come to terms with stuff that, you know, gave the work the intensity of poetry.
do you think that this technique that you're dealing with is equally applicable to people who are living with chronic, sometimes terminal conditions, where they're in the moment dealing with the issues as well as just as much as you're dealing with it as something from the past.
Yeah, I think it is, well, for myself, it is dealing with my life as it is present, because of the symptoms that are still present. That's something I would like people to understand, that the effects are long term, so people can understand how to care for people who are survivors. Absolutely, of course. I mean, I can't speak for others, but I think whatever experience you have, writing about it validates that experience. Because, you know, it's like, this is what we live with, this is what I feel, this is what I think, this is what it's like. And, you know, and I think research shows that, you know, people are better off, you know. Look, we all like to appropriate, or some Buddhist sayings, and one of them I can never find the source of. If someone knows, please let me know, because it's terrible to appropriate a quote from a spiritual tradition and not source it. Or maybe it's not. Let me know if you can. But there's this quote that when you see your suffering as a story or as a poem or as a dance, it's no longer your suffering. It's a poem, you know. So you know, it's a suffering to be ill, you know, there's no way around that. And I think there's some sort of consolation, yeah, when we see that as an act of creation. And I believe that it's really important to get that out there and to publish it, because then other people can understand an experience they haven't had, and that understanding hopefully leads to empathy and compassion. And more powerfully than that, it can, you know, change diagnoses. I mean, in terms of how people are diagnosed, when people share their experience, as I'm sure you know, it's a very powerful thing to do. It can help doctors and medical people, you know, do things better, you know.
I think my last question is to ask you to leave our audience with some words of advice for those people who can relate to what you're saying, appreciate what you're doing, see the value of it, but they've never put a pen to paper. What words of advice do you have for them to start? How do you start this?
Well, I would give the advice is, you know, don't sit down and write a masterpiece. That's not how it works. Like, give yourself permission to write rubbish, to just, you know, really be true to your experience, to write down the stuff that proves that, you know, you're not mentally okay, to write down the stuff that, you know, means your family will never speak to you ever again. You know, you don't, to just like be unedited, you know, to write as if no one's going to read it, to write for yourself first, and then you know, think about then the whole process of making it something you would, you know, craft and deliver to an audience is not what comes first. Yeah. So I would look, that's my bias, you know, I would recommend writing is a life. It's a writing life. It's another life, for me and for many people, that write. It's its own life, and that it's one that you create, and you know, just to know you're not on your own. It's something you know, you can voice, you know. Yeah. Shame doesn't
Thank
like the
you.
light. It's not your shame. It's there's lots of things that don't like the light. Bring it out into the light.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that there are people listening tonight and will listen to the recording who where your words will help them reconcile to their condition, reconcile to a possible trauma, to some PTSD, whatever it is, and use some of your writing techniques so they live more easily with them. That would be a real success for the last hour, I would say.
It's
And
better out
you?
than in. It's better out than in. I think
Well,
so.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, and we're sort of at the end where I would like to thank the audience for listening. I'd like to mention to the audience that next month we have a lady by the name of Sasha Soroff, and she's going to share her work and how her experiences with painful neuropathy transformed her artistic career. Unfortunately, I know a little bit about neuropathy, and so maybe I can learn something about how it can transform my career. And as always, please don't forget the tip jar. And I think, oh, and a big thanks, of course, to John Ivory for bringing Claire to the stage tonight, and to Brianna for producing on behalf of the Marsh. And I think that's it. I think that's all the thank. Oh, no, well, of course, a huge thank you to Claire. Don't want to forget that. Thank you very. We couldn't have done it without you, Claire. You know.